Hello everyone, guys. In this video I'm gonna give you my 7 best tips to learn Brazilian Portuguese. Hey everyone, my name is Jan van A, and in this video, as I just said in the introduction, I'm gonna give you my 7 best tips to learn Brazilian Portuguese. I learned the language a few years ago myself. I spent a while in Brazil and I've learned a lot throughout the process, and today I'm going to share with you my best tips. Now, the first tip I would like to give you is that you need to be motivated, right? It's the case for any foreign language. If you want to be successful in learning a foreign language, you need to have the motivations, you need to have the reasons, or just simply a connection with the language. And it's just something about the culture or the language that attracts to you. If you don't have that, then, well, then maybe you can still give it a try, but you're likely to give up. So if you really need that language, make sure you are motivated. Make a list with all the reasons why you need to learn that foreign language, why you need to learn Brazilian Portuguese. Now, the second tip that I would like to give you is that you need to be selective about you want to learn, because in the beginning, as always, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the language. If you just start off by listening to Brazilian TV or the radio, you know, there's going to be so many new words all of a sudden. Or if you maybe you're planning to go to the country, or you live already in Brazil, you're exposed by the language, it's very difficult to learn if you get overwhelmed, basically. If you get too much information, to focus on the most important vocabulary. That's what we always say here at Language Boost. Be selective about what you want to learn. In the beginning, focus on like verbs, like, you know, to be, to have, to go, to give, like these verbs that you need all the time to live, to learn, to study. Some pronouns, of course, and later on, once you can already hold conversation, focus on vocabulary that you need. So maybe you work as an engineer, then learning the word for engineer obviously is going to be more useful than the word for leaf. Now, I know that many of you guys do speak Spanish already. Don't make the mistake of just speaking Spanish with a Portuguese accent. It's going to be very weird. Portuguese is a language. It has its own culture. It has its own slang. It has its own way of saying things. It has a lot of expressions. It's more than just Spanish with another accent, right? So obviously, yes, if you do speak Spanish already, it's going to help you. Spanish and Portuguese are very similar, and you will notice that once you start learning Portuguese vocabulary, that, well, you can almost link everything directly to Spanish, and that's going to be very helpful. But yeah, don't try to just speak Spanish with a Portuguese accent. Try to feel the language, to live it, and to actually speak Brazilian Portuguese. It's a language, it's not another version of Spanish. And this brings us to the next tip, because if you really want to be, you know, become Brazilian a little bit, I mean, if you really want to speak a language, well, that language needs to become part of yourself, right? At least it needs to be somewhere in you. And one reason to do that is, of course, by going to the country. Brazil is a great country to travel to, maybe even to live in for a few years. If you were born in Brazil, then maybe it's not so interesting for you. But as European, I think Brazil is a great country to spend a few months at least. The weather, the food, I found the Brazilian food surprisingly good. And of course the people are very open, they're very happy to talk to you, they're very curious where you're from, they're very easygoing, it's very easy to make friends in Brazil. And of course, speaking Brazilian Portuguese is gonna help you connecting to the people. And you know, once you have that connection with the people, you actually start building relationships in the language, and that way the language can become part of you, and you can develop like your own style, basically, so that you sound really authentic in Portuguese. Learn new vocabulary in context. And I know it's a very common tip that you hear on YouTube or that you read in blog posts, but it's really true. Learning vocabulary from a words list is boring. And it's very difficult to remember. It's oftentimes easier to remember a new word in a whole phrase. It's oftentimes easier to remember the whole phrase than just the words. You need to build connections. You know, learning languages is about building connections. Connect the word with a word that you already know in another language. In case language is similar, you can use mnemonics, of course, but you can also put it in a sentence so that you can connect that word to the sentence. And you know, when you learn a sentence, it's easier to imagine. It's easy to imagine a sentence. Like if I say I give you the apple, you know, it's easy for me to imagine me giving you the apple than if I just mention the word for apple. Does that make sense? Maybe not the best example, but you see what I mean. I hope. Now the sixth tip that I have used, that you should use what you learn. If you learn a new word, use it. So if you learn it during a lesson, for example, use it in a sentence, use it in a story. Also, before the end of the lesson, repeat the sentences, repeat the vocabulary that you just learned. You can also use it if you have friends who speak the language. You can write it. You can, learning vocabulary is one thing, but I think only once you start using the new words, the new grammar structures, you actually start activating the new words or vocabulary. And of course, without activation, you're never going to speak a language well. So activate the things you learn by using it. It really helps you to memorize new words and grammar structures. Now the last tip that I want to share with you is repetition is the key. In language learning, I would say 70 or 80% is about repetition. It's about repeating the things that you have already learned. I experienced this myself when learning Russian. Words are very long, and oftentimes I needed to repeat a word 8, 9 or even 10 times before I could memorize it. I find that in Brazilian Portuguese easier because many, especially the complex words, difficult words, are often similar to English, so it's easier to memorize. Use spaced repetition. If you know what that is, look for just search for spaced repetition basically here on YouTube, and you will find out how apps like Anki, for example, can help you reviewing and repeating actually the words that you know. Okay, guys, that was it for now. I hope that this video is going to help you to learn Brazilian Portuguese, but of course you can also use most of these tips for other foreign languages, right? That was it for now, guys. I wish you a very nice day, and see you in the next video.